All right, good evening. Welcome to the Gathering at Scott Memorial Home Edition. I'm going to dive right in with a confession that sometimes I can't stand the church. Not this church, but the church. And sometimes I can't stand some people in church. With everything that's happening in United Methodism and this general conference coming up in February, sometimes I can't stand the United Methodist Church, and I wonder, is it even worth saving? And when I start to have feelings like that, these big, hard, difficult feelings, I take comfort in the fact that Jesus felt the same way. Hear now a reading from the Gospel of Mark chapter 12, beginning with verse 38. As he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at the banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." So what Jesus didn't like about some of the people in the church or the synagogue of his day was that, not that he didn't have a problem with the fact that they were leaders in the church, but how they were leading, why they were leading, what their motivation was. And you see time and time again throughout the Gospels, Jesus going toe-to-toe with the scribes, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. And his problem with them in this passage is that they like to walk around in their flowing robes. Priests had these big, ornate robes so that everyone would know who they were, that they were important and set apart, and they wouldn't wear them just to church, but in the marketplace. When I wear my clerical collar out in public, people usually run and hide. Back then, it was a sign of respect. And those in authority in this particular passage loved that. They loved their attention. It was important to them. They also liked to have the most important seats in the synagogues and places of honor at the banquets, right? They were first in line at the potluck, always. But perhaps the most damning criticism comes when Jesus says they devour widows' houses. What does that mean? How are they devouring the houses of widows? And this is like totally antithetical to the reason that leaders existed in the synagogues, right? It was up to the Pharisees, the chief priests, the scribes to protect the widows, the orphans, the immigrants, the poor, those living on the margins. It was their job to stand up for them. And instead of standing up, they're devouring their houses. How? Well, the scholar Joel Marcus says that there are two ways perhaps that they were doing this. One way was that, a man would die and all the widow would have is that home. That's it. She can't get a job. That is all she has to keep her from living on the streets. And so the Pharisees would come to her and say, well, how are you going to tithe? We're going to have to give up that house so you can continue meeting your obligation to God. Devouring widows' houses. Or sometimes scribes would act as probate lawyers and they could overcharge these widows, getting more money than they needed to, costing the widows their very homes. Jesus was furious at their treatment, at the way that these leaders were representing the church. And he said, these men will be punished most severely. Then it goes on to tell us that Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put. Watch the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more in the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth. She, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. And we read this and we say, I want to be like the widow. But let's be honest, we're not like the widow. She was poor. Her house was devoured, right? She had nothing left to live on. And if you look at the federal poverty level amounts for 2018, you can compare yourself to the widow if you're a family of 1 and you make about $12,000 a year, or a family of 4 making about $25,000 a year. Most of us don't fall into that category. Most of us have more to give than 2 small copper pennies. In Greek, the word is lepta, and it was worth about 1/64 of a denarii, 1/64 of 1 day's work at minimum wage. It was nothing, my friends. We want to be like the widow. The reality is we're not. We have more resources than the widow. So are we like the people in the story that would give large amounts from our abundance? Unfortunately, we're not really like them either. According to nonprofitsource.com, which tracks all kinds of charitable and nonprofit giving, the average giving by adults who attend U.S. Protestant churches is about $17 a week. 37% of regular church attendees and evangelicals don't even give money to the church, period. 17% of American families have reduced the amount of money they give to their local church. Although 17% of Americans say that they regularly tithe, it's only about 3 to 5% of Americans who do that. 5% tithe, 80% only give 2% of their income. And we might say, well, we're doing the best we can. I know that we have a lot now, but we'll give more when we have more. Some of us are still struggling financially. The reality is that nationally, Christians are giving about 2.5% of their income, when during the Great Depression, we gave 3.3%. During the Great Depression, we gave more than we're giving now. So why is that? Well, there's someone named Daisy Gruall who wrote an article and contributed in the Scientific American, and research has been done that found that the more money we have gives us the ability, or it gives us two things that those living on the margins don't have. We have freedom and we have independence. If I have no money to spend, I don't have the freedom to decide how to spend what I don't have. I don't have the independence to go and buy and shop and do what I want when I want. If I have nothing in my pockets, if I have nothing in my bank accounts. And so with that freedom and independence comes this desire to say, wow, I like this. I want to make sure I always have money. So I'm going to start saving my money and putting it away. Whereas people who only have enough to live on for that day are thinking about surviving them for that day. And if they see someone beside them that will not make it through the day without their help, they will give. And so the less money we have, ironically, the more generous that we are with it. And so I read this story and I'm like, well, we're not quite the widow and we're not quite the wealthy giving that. But if we look at the story of the widow, Jesus doesn't say he was proud of her because she gave money. She gave all she had. She gave all that she was. And it makes me think and wonder, and there's this scholar named Pete Perry who has like this really profound statement about this. I'm like, okay, so is giving even worth it? Is the church, are people in the church even worth saving? Because look at this widow. Her house is being devoured. The church and the leaders of the church are mistreating her. They are betraying her. And Jesus goes on in the very next verses to talk about how the temple's going to be destroyed anyways, that not a single stone will be left on top of another one. So why give to something that may not last? Why give to people that might hurt or betray us? Is it worth it? And Pete Perry has this powerful quote. He says, Jesus calls his disciples to notice that this widow gives all she has, literally the whole of her life. She gives her whole life to something that is corrupt and condemned. Moreover, this is the last scene in Jesus' public ministry. From here, all that remains in Mark's telling is the temple discourse and the passion narrative. So this widow offers a glimpse into what Jesus is about. He is on the way to give the whole of his life for something that is corrupt and condemned. All of humanity, the whole world. So maybe the reason that we give isn't because we've determined that what we're giving to is worth it, deserves it, because let's be honest, Jesus gave his life for us when we were broken and a hot mess, when we hadn't earned it, we didn't deserve it. We give because we're giving to God. We're trusting in a God who can bring death from life, who can bring life from death, who can bring hope from despair, who can bring healing from brokenness and bitterness and pain. And so my hope and prayer for all of us, I don't know what your story is or where you are, is that you keep giving faithfully, not just financially, okay? This is not about money. That's not what this sermon is ultimately about. It's not what this passage is ultimately about. We are supposed to give the whole of our life, all our heart, all our mind, all our body, all our soul, to someone that we can trust and someone who showed us what it's like, has modeled giving all that we are to something that might be corrupt and condemned, but with God, all things are possible. And that's not how the story has to end. So I don't know what you're struggling with, where you are, but take heart this evening that I'm praying for you. I'm here for you. And when you're all in, nothing can compare to the peace and the comfort you find, even in your darkest of days. Thanks be to God. Amen.